because most of the blacks in Salem settled in this area, in what is now the Bridge Street area, and it was known as Little Africa. The Remonds lived closer to town, and their story is not unique, actually. That their father came here from the West Indies, I believe from Curacao, and when he was 10, met a woman in Boston, a free woman in Boston. They married and raised 10 children. And those 10 children raised 8 children. Those 8 children in this family of 10 grew up in a home where everything was discussed, where prominent abolitionists came to dinner, where people that we've read about in history books sat at the table. So Charles and Sarah, brother and sister, grew up in an environment of books, discussions, critiques, and, I might say, outrage. If Charles and Sarah and their siblings and their father and mother were alive today, they would be hosting Black Lives Matters meetings. Trust me. They were fearless. Even though they experienced the discrimination, the pain, all of the horror of racism of the 18th and 19th centuries right here. Remember that we are not too far from where the ship Desire was built in Marblehead, the country's first actual slave ship. No one's hands in this story are really clean. And yet this family and others like them spoke up, spoke out. Charles and Sarah traveled the country and Great Britain, talking about the horrors, the evils, if you will, of slavery. He was known as a great orator. She was not far behind him. They both wanted to convince, before the Civil War, tried to convince Great Britain to cease whatever support it might be giving to the Confederacy, to the slave trade. It was challenging. Here, they ran into experiences such as riding on Jim Crow train cars. In fact, Charles was the first black speaker to the Massachusetts House of Representatives and argued against Jim Crow trains right down the railroad track, right over there. Okay, argued against them. His sister, Sarah, was active in both women's issues and in the anti-slavery issues. And Charles saw the overlap. Charles once went to a convention of the anti-slavery, one of the anti-slavery groups, and found when he got there that the women were not allowed to be seated because they were women. And he objected strenuously, vocally. He lent his argument to the cause of women. It's the joy of having this part here is because it brings a piece of our history into the forefront. There are people who argue, and I think rightly so, that what goes on today is because folks don't know each other's stories. And I hope that this will be an impetus for the schools in Salem and elsewhere to bring this history into the classroom. When I teach, it's always there. But if I'm not teaching, I don't know who else is bringing it there. bring this history into the classroom. If you teach your students and your children, because education begins at home, if you teach this history, these experiences to young people, then they have a chance. And they begin to look at a bigger picture than themselves. One more little piece I want to bring in. You may know the story. Who knows Charlotte Fortin? I know you know. Oh, my work is so hard. Charlotte Fortin was a child, was born in Philadelphia. And the Philadelphia schools were not yet integrated. And so, although, keep in mind that the Remond children, the family moved down to Rhode Island because the schools in Salem were not integrated, but eventually came back when the schools opened up. Charlotte's father sent her to Salem because the schools had become integrated. And Charlotte, who encountered instances of not being acknowledged, not being recognized, but her father sent her to live with the Remond family. And so Sarah became a big sister, a mentor to young Charlotte. And Charlotte was the first known black African-American graduate from Salem Normal School, now Salem University, in 1856. Y'all need to know this. I will briefly plug myself. I will